German generals weren't just skeptical, they laughed. To them, the idea that the United States could launch a sustained, high-speed supply chain across a ruined continent sounded like pure fantasy. Their strategy was simple. Let the Americans race ahead, let them run out of fuel, ammunition, and food, and then strike. The Germans had seen it before. In their minds, wars weren't won by flashy advances. Wars were won by starving your opponent of movement. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. And movement in war depends on logistics. What they didn't see coming was the Red Ball Express. From August to November 1944, for 82 non-stop days, American forces pulled off one of the most audacious logistical operations in military history. Nearly 6,000 trucks thundered across the roads of France, operating 24 hours a day, delivering over 412,000 tons of supplies across more than 122 million ton-miles. That's fuel, food, bullets, and everything else an army needs to keep pushing forward. Without it, Patton's tanks would have frozen in place. With it, they rolled through France like a tidal wave. And the people behind the wheel? Predominantly African American soldiers, many of them denied basic respect and rights in their own country, who became the engine behind the Allied advance. These men, trained as drivers in segregated units, shattered every stereotype the military system had clung to. Under brutal conditions and relentless pressure, they proved something far greater than logistical capability. They proved determination, resilience, and unshakable courage under fire. The Germans didn't laugh for long. Every day, the Red Ball Express pushed out 12,500 tons of supplies. That wasn't just unprecedented, it was unthinkable. And it wasn't clean or easy. Mechanical failures ran as high as 30% daily. Convoys operated on narrow, often cratered roads, with no room for rest, and no time for delay. Trucks ran around the clock, marked with giant red balls on their windshields, roaring down designated one-way routes at speeds that would have gotten any civilian driver court-martialed. Safety rules were bypassed in favor of raw momentum. Time, not comfort, was the priority. If a truck broke down, mechanics cannibalized it for parts on the spot. If another broke down, they'd improvise. Field repairs, part swapping, and sheer determination kept the supply lines alive. There were no extra vehicles, no backup plans. Just men, machines, and the understanding that failure was not an option. American trucks came equipped with innovations the Germans couldn't match. All-wheel drive, automatic tire inflation, and rugged chassis designed to take a beating. But even with the best machinery, it was the people who made it work. Drivers navigated blackout conditions, icy roads, and enemy fire. Many were teenagers, some barely trained, yet they carried the lifeblood of the entire Allied operation mile after mile, ton after ton. This wasn't elegant. It was gritty, messy, improvised warfare logistics. But it shortened the war by at least 6 months. And that meant lives saved. Cities liberated. Germany's collapse accelerated. German troops started calling it ghost convoys. They'd hear the hum of engines at night when there were no trucks. They began believing that the Americans had an endless, invisible force keeping them supplied. It broke morale. Because the message was clear. No matter how fast you retreat, no matter how far you run, the Americans will keep coming, and they'll be ready when they get there. French civilians, beaten down by years of occupation, witnessed this too. Convoys rumbling through their towns, stacked with fuel, food, and gear. American drivers tossing out candy and cigarettes. The message was loud. Liberation wasn't just coming, it was rolling in at full throttle. And for African American troops behind the wheel, this wasn't just military service. It was proof. Proof that they weren't just laborers or second-class soldiers. They were the beating heart of a victory in motion. And the military couldn't ignore it. The performance of these drivers laid the groundwork for future integration. They broke the system's assumptions wide open. Before 1944, wars were measured by tactics, battles, terrain, and maneuvers. But after, it became clear, Logistics is strategy. The Germans had tanks, tactics, and commanders. But they couldn't keep their troops fed or fueled. They rationed supplies. They concealed convoys. They treated logistics like a background task. The Americans, by contrast, treated logistics like the main event. They didn't ration, they flooded the front. They didn't hide, they overwhelmed. The Red Ball Express wasn't efficient by textbook standards, but it worked. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. It got the job done. It moved faster, louder, and longer than anyone thought possible. And in doing so, it ended the war faster than any plan or playbook ever could. Field Marshal Walter Model reportedly admitted it plainly. They were beaten by trucks, by industry, by a system that produced more vehicles than the Germans could destroy, and more importantly by soldiers who refused to stop driving, even when the roads disappeared and the rules collapsed. The Express wasn't a miracle. It was the inevitable result of American industrial might, African American determination, mechanical resilience, and strategic improvisation, all colliding at once. It was proof that an army doesn't just march on its stomach, it races on its supply line. The Red Ball Express was noisy, chaotic, and relentless. But it was also genius. And it proved, once and for all, that victory in modern warfare doesn't belong to the side with the most brilliant general or the most advanced weapon. It belongs to the side that can keep moving. If this story hit you the way it hit history, if you had no idea that thousands of African American drivers helped end the war faster, or that logistics won where guns couldn't, then hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to know that war isn't just fought on battlefields. Drop a comment if you've ever underestimated the power of moving parts. And subscribe for more untold stories that changed everything, because the wheels of history don't turn without someone driving. So let's not pretend this was just about trucks. The Red Ball Express wasn't just a convoy, it was a message. A message to the enemy, to the world, and to America itself. To the enemy, it screamed, "You were wrong." The German High Command had studied logistics. They understood supply chains. And in their war manuals, what the Americans were doing was impossible. Moving tens of thousands of tons of fuel, rations, ammunition, and spare parts across hundreds of miles, through broken infrastructure, past wrecked bridges and cratered roads without stopping, that didn't make tactical sense. Not in their doctrine. They believed movement had limits. Fuel runs out. Morale collapses. Mechanics can't keep up. They bet everything on the idea that the Allies would outpace themselves and collapse under their own weight. But what the Germans failed to grasp was that this wasn't about traditional doctrine. This was about industrial warfare, and America had shifted the entire paradigm. Because the US didn't just bring soldiers to Europe. It brought factories. It brought convoys of parts. It brought steel, rubber, manpower, and improvisation in volumes that no spreadsheet or field manual could predict. And once it arrived, it didn't stop. It didn't slow down. It didn't ration. It deluged. In the old world of warfare, a blitz was a calculated lightning strike. In this new version, a blitz was backed by 10,000 trucks screaming down a one-way road with no brakes, no stops, no second chances. That was the Red Ball Express. And to the world, it said something else. America can outsupply your war. No nation had ever attempted a logistics operation at this scale, not for 82 days straight, with almost zero downtime. And when the operation ran into problems, and it did, American ingenuity kicked in. Road bottlenecks? Designated one-way highways with MPs keeping traffic moving 24/7. Breakdowns? Mechanics stripped trucks for parts on the side of the road. Shortage of vehicles? Borrow more, reroute, double the load. When that wasn't enough, bring in planes. This wasn't just brute force, it was resilience by design. And when it worked, the front line didn't just hold, it advanced. Patton's tanks didn't crawl, they surged. Cities fell, supply lines extended, and with every mile conquered, the Red Ball Express followed right behind, running on little sleep, high stress, and sheer adrenaline. But maybe the most important message wasn't for the enemy or the world. It was for America itself. Because the Red Ball Express also exposed something uncomfortable. That the very men who powered the Allied advance, who kept Patton's tanks moving and helped liberate France, weren't even treated as equals in their own country. Over 75% of the drivers were African American. They were soldiers in segregated units, fighting for a country that told them they weren't good enough to sit at the same lunch counter. And yet, when it mattered most, when the front lines were at risk of grinding to a halt, these men stepped up. They drove day and night, through enemy territory, with little rest and no glory. They kept the war machine alive. Without them, there is no Red Ball Express. Without them, the advance stalls. The war stretches on. Lives are lost. These were the heroes whose names didn't make the headlines, who didn't get the parades, but they left their mark on history in rubber and diesel and determination. And the impact rippled far beyond the war. Because when these veterans came home, they didn't forget what they did. They brought their skills and their defiance back with them. Some launched trucking businesses. Others fought to desegregate public services and military policy. The proof of their worth had been laid bare, mile after mile, in the most demanding operation the U.S. Army had ever attempted. The Red Ball Express didn't just deliver fuel. It delivered change. It challenged the very foundations of segregation and made it impossible to deny what had happened out there on those roads in France. And the lesson stuck. Because logistics wasn't a one-time miracle, it became a cornerstone of American power. The techniques tested during Red Ball volume over optimization, decentralization, mechanical redundancy, and speed over structure became standard in both military and civilian infrastructure. These ideas eventually shaped the interstate highway system. They informed supply chains for decades. The industrial muscle flex during those 82 days didn't just end the war faster, it redefined how America would operate afterward. Even now, in the age of global commerce, overnight shipping, and satellite-tracked fleets, the Red Ball Express remains a blueprint. Not because of its technology, but because of its mindset. Move fast. Adapt faster. Don't wait for perfect conditions, create momentum, and keep going. And the psychological impact? Massive. To the Germans, those convoys were more than just trucks. They were phantoms. Drivers ran at night with headlights blazing, ignoring conventional military practice. The roads echoed with engine roars. To some German troops, it felt like supply lines were haunting them. Even when no trucks were visible, the sound stuck in their heads. Fear spread. Morale crumbled. It wasn't just about defeating the enemy physically, it was about overwhelming them mentally. The Red Ball Express didn't fire a shot, but it broke down resistance one load at a time. Just the presence of that Operation Unstoppable, unrelenting signaled to the Germans that this wasn't going to end well for them. The end came faster than they expected, and the trucks were part of the reason why. What started as a desperate improvisation turned into a logistical masterpiece. A $100 million operation that paid for itself not just in battlefield victories, but in saved months, saved lives, and a strategic momentum the enemy never recovered from. Field Marshal Model, one of Germany's toughest commanders, reportedly acknowledged the truth that many others refused to say aloud. They were defeated by American logistics, not by brilliance in tactics, not by superior numbers in one battle, but by a system that could outproduce, outmaneuver, and outlast anything the Wehrmacht could throw at it. That's what happens when a country puts its full industrial and social weight behind the idea of movement. And maybe that's the real legacy of the Red Ball Express. That movement is power. That people given purpose, tools, and trust can do the impossible. That logistics isn't some invisible background operation, but the backbone of every victory. That soldiers who were overlooked, underestimated, and segregated could still change history. The Red Ball Express was noisy, chaotic, unglamorous work, but it moved history forward. One crate, one gallon, one driver at a time. The Red Ball Express didn't run on medals or speeches. It ran on worn-out tires, overworked engines, and pure human grit. By the time it shut down in November 1944, the war in Europe had fundamentally changed. Germany was retreating fast, its defenses crumbling, and while tanks and infantry got the headlines, it was logistics that turned possibility into progress. The Express didn't just deliver fuel and bullets, it delivered momentum. And in war, momentum is everything. It's what breaks sieges. It's what overwhelms defenses. And it's what exhausts an enemy that thought they still had time. The Red Ball Express didn't give them that time. It burned right through it. The reality is, warfare had reached a turning point. Before the Red Ball, victory was still romanticized about heroism on the front lines, elite units, brilliant generals. But after, the conversation shifted. Supply chains were the battle. And in that battle, America had proved it could outlast, outwork, and outdeliver any opponent. And no one could miss what made that possible. American industry, improvisation, and the people who kept driving when everything said stop. This is why German commanders were left stunned. They had calculated everything: terrain, fuel usage, unit deployments, but they hadn't calculated this, that a country could mobilize not just a fighting force, but a rolling supply machine with no off switch. That convoys could become weapons. That truck routes could decide the course of a war. Even decades later, military strategists would return to this operation not just as history, but as a model, a proof of concept that industrial-scale logistics, executed at speed, changes what is militarily possible. It's not about perfection, it's about movement. Because if you can keep moving, you control the war. But the most powerful part of this story isn't the strategy. It's the people inside those trucks. Thousands of African American soldiers, trained under a segregated system, were suddenly thrust into the most critical operation of the Allied advance. And they didn't just deliver, they excelled. They drove through shellfire, snow, and sabotage. They slept in shifts, worked with broken radios, and pushed through exhaustion most of us will never understand. Their service forced a conversation that couldn't be ignored anymore. These weren't support troops. They were the supply line. The reason the tanks had gas. The reason the front kept advancing. The reason the war didn't drag on into 1946. And when the war ended, the legacy didn't. Many of those men came home and entered civilian life with experience most Americans didn't have: experience managing convoys, navigating infrastructure, fixing vehicles under pressure. They applied those lessons. They helped launch trucking businesses. They brought their skills to highway construction and freight logistics. The backbone they built during wartime helped shape the post-war economy. And all of it started with a gamble, a desperate, aggressive decision to bet the war on trucks and men and movement. That's why this story matters. Because the Red Ball Express wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of operation Hollywood tends to spotlight. But it was one of the most decisive factors in ending World War II. It was how American strength, industrial, logistical, human, was turned into speed, reach, and relentless pressure. It was how the Allies broke through. And for anyone who still thinks war is won by glory on the front lines, this is the reality check. It's the supply line that decides who advances and who stalls out. If this shifted your understanding of history, hit that like button. Share it with someone who thinks logistics is just background noise. Drop a comment if you had no idea the story even existed and why stories like this still matter. And if you want more hard-hitting history like this, make sure you subscribe, because the past isn't just dates and battles. It's engines, sweat, and everything that keeps the wheels turning.